What is up, YouTube? And today we are talking about the Moonlight Blessing. Now, we're not actually talking about the first season one with like Spectre Tenebria, Arbiter Vildred that you get at the beginning of the game. We're actually going to be talking about the second one, which you get after completing most of the story here. Mostly because I think the second Moonlight Blessing is going to have a lot more closer in power units. And it's just a very hard choice to make because honestly, I would say that, maybe 3 of these units are very, very powerful, and it might be very hard for you guys to choose. We're just going to talk about which units you should be going for in the current metagame for Epic 7. Pretty much all of these units will be solely for PvP, just because most Moonlight 5-stars in general are built for PvP skill-wise. And because of that, we're just mostly going to be talking about PvP applications here, because even though some units here might be okay for PvE, we're actually pretty decent in very niche areas. For the most part, you're mostly going to be picking these Moonlight 5-star units for the PvP aspect, even if you don't like World Arena and Real-Time Arena, because of the fact that Guild Wars and regular Arena are very, very important in actually progressing your account, because it will provide you an income of Mystic Metals and Sky Stones to pull for future units. So we're going to start off with the 3 units that I kind of recommend not going for, starting at the bottom here. So first off, we have Commander Pavel. Now, Commander Pavel, just a side note, if you do like to cleave and play very aggressively, he's pretty decent because you'll see he uses a fighting spirit mechanic where if an ally except himself crits, he gains 20, and basically when an ally crits or twice or 2 allies crit, he will activate this extra attack Begone, which does a ton of damage, pushes the CR, and then you can actually S3 in one shot, just a unit on the field, and this S2 hits super, super hard. So basically what you want to use him with is a unit like Ran. If you get an RNL proc, you'll proc Commander Pavel's passive right away, or you want another unit to go after the Ran to actually, have this proc. If you don't have this proc, it's pretty bad. So because of that, you really want to make sure you get those 2 crits in, otherwise Commander Pavel's pretty useless in a very fast comp. The problem is there is a lot of anti-crit in the game right now, right? You have Navy Captain Landy, the biggest one. Commander Pavel cannot be played against Navy Captain Landy unless you have a guaranteed way to dispel the anti-crit buff. And even then, you run the risk of actually, not critting. So because of that, you have to be very, very careful. So because of that, I think he is the worst option. If you are primarily a cleaver, I still would recommend against him because even if you do like to cleave and play very aggressive, there's some other units that are more standard play units, but they can still be picked in a lot of cleave scenarios as like an anchor pick, and you'll see that they'll just be way better. The second unit I recommend to not pick here is going to be Sylvan Sage Vivian. She did just get buffed, but honestly it's not enough. Her main gimmick is that she has this focus system, right? And she can be immune to debuffs and stuff like that, and she'll just be very tanky because she has this passive which reduces the damage she takes to be capped. And because of that, she is very bulky, very annoying. She heals a lot with her S3, also does a ton of damage, right? But the only thing is, her passive is a focus system, so this gets countered by ML Politis, this gets countered by Solitaria of the Snow, and also she doesn't reduce damage from extra damage, so units like ML Senya will destroy her. Anyone on certain artifacts, such as the very popular 3F artifact, this will just go through the damage mitigation. Also Rocket Punch Gauntlet and also the main holder, Ikarina, literally one-shots her. Same with Vermuru because of his fixed damage on his S3. So because of that, she's still not that great. Even after her buffs, she's pretty much the same. So I think she's not a great choice. Yes, she's a pretty solid damage dealer, and in Hall of Trials, she's the best damage dealer there right now for this current rotation. But honestly, I wouldn't really choose my Moonlight Blessing unit just for Hall of Trials. The third unit I recommend not getting is Remnant Violet, and this is hard for me to say because he's one of my favorite units. He also did get buffed with Sylvan Sage. Before, he just gave himself a buff every turn with evasion, and that basically made it so that if you put Unbuffable on him, he can't evade, or if you dispel it off. Now, he just gets the evasion in his passive, which is a long time due. And they also just buffed his damage outright on both his S1 and his S3. The problem is he's, one, very, very hard to build, right? If you look at his stats here, yes, he's very squishy, but he has a lot of damage. But the thing is, you want him to be pretty bulky because you're going to have to play around the fact that he will sometimes get hit. And even if he evades, Like I mentioned with Sylvan Sage, these fixed damage artifacts completely destroy him, so you actually still need some damage. Also, if you get slept or stunned, right, your evasion doesn't really work. So because of that, you're just kind of sitting there. And there's another unit on this list that completely counters Remnant Violet, which we'll talk about, because he can sleep him. And Remnant Violet, even though some games he pops off 1v4s and does great, most of the time you're going to be coping and just praying that he dodges and get very tilted when he doesn't. And even if he does dodge a lot of the time, sometimes he'll just lose. And also there's a lot of good counters to evasion, right? Like the sleep I mentioned, and also Zahawk, an RGB unit. Also Briar Witch Asaria with her exclusive equipment now. Very fast, very annoying. Will pretty much just destroy your Remnant Violet because he gets defense broken, right? And even if he's has that evasion, if he gets hit by a defense broken while he's defense broken, he'll pretty much die. So those 3 units, including Remnant Violet, Sylvan Sage, and Commander Pavel, I would stay away from. If they're very, very appealing to you, design-wise, skill set-wise, go for it. But in general, I think for now, these 3 units are good to stay away from. So now we are breaking into the top 3 of the Moonlight Blessing choices. So at the number 3 spot, I'm going to have Mediator Kawerik. He used to be probably number 2 or number 1 debatably in the past, but now just not as good. And the biggest reason is, even though he's very powerful with his skills, right, he has this full cleanse, attack buff, immunity, right, he also makes it so that if he's stunned for a turn or even slept, he'll cleanse it off. He also has this very strong S2, hits super hard, decreases attack and gives a huge barrier, and this S1 that not only cycles him but also his team. The thing is, he gets countered very hard by meta units, and what I mean by that is anything with a 2-turn debuff, stun or sleep, really kind of destroys him. Also, anything with a skill reset, so Noggle, who's very popular, really does well against him, and anything with injuries really kind of just destroys him because all of his damage comes from his max health. And he is a very hard-hitting utility unit, which is very nice, support unit, but there's a lot of injuries in the game, right? Most notably Urban Shadow Shoe, and just the addition of injury set just kind of makes him a lot weaker, and because of that, it's just pretty hard to use him. Also, his S3 is a non-attack skill, so anything like a Celine kind of just pops off against him, and Celine is super strong now after her buffs. So because of how the meta has shifted, I think he's number 3. PvP is still good, you can pick him a lot still into certain debuff comps, but just keep in mind you have to be careful about his counter picks. You can't use him in defense teams, which is pretty sad, but in offense, you can use him quite a bit, and in RTA World Arena, you'll see him pretty infrequently now, but sometimes you can pick him, so because of that, we're going to put him at the number 3 spot. And now at number 2, we have Conqueror Lilias. And when I first made this video, she was by far the best option to go for from this Moonlight Blessing, just because so broken, and honestly you can probably still debate her as number 1 because her S3 is so strong. The Vigor buff is insane, it makes your units do more damage and tankier. The defense tankier aspect is way underrated, it makes your units very hard to kill. And on top of that, you put decreased attack on all the enemies, which is super annoying. You also decrease buff durations. And of course, you have this very annoying S1 dual attack that synergizes very well with units like Navy Captain Landy and Abyssal Euphine. And this very annoying S2 CR pushback provoke barrier thing that's just super toxic to deal with. She has fallen though because there are a lot more counters now. You have like Moon Bunny Dominion, you have Green Selena as well. And she just gets outsped by a lot of other openers now. But if you do pick her in the right circumstances, you do want to pick her with like Navy Captain Landy and Abyssal Euphine, and probably you want to make sure that she doesn't get picked into like Green Selene and stuff like that. She's still pretty good. Even though she does have counters out there, her S3 is just so strong that it doesn't really matter, so you can still pick her into her soft counters and still get a lot of value out of her S3. But I think there is one unit that's better, which we'll talk about in Conqueror Lilias. Still very strong, very good in PvP. You can use her on defense teams for Guild Wars still. You'll see her a lot in World Arena, just not as frequent as the number 1 unit, which we'll talk about now. And yes, finally, number 1 best pick from this Moonlight Blessing now, especially after the meta shifts and his buffs, is Death Dealer Ray. This unit, if you don't have him, you probably ban him a lot in World Arena. He's mostly for World Arena, but in Guild Wars offense, he's still very powerful against evasion units, and just in general if you need injuries. And on defense teams, you'll see him sometimes in Guild Wars and Arena as well. And he's just very strong because we have this S3 that will dispel 2 buffs, very annoying. Also Sleep, which will Of course, you can see decreased critical hit resistance and evasion, so very good against Navy Captain Landy teams and also against anything with evasion. And inflict venom, which is like poison, but also will inflict injuries. So just completely destroys a lot of health scaling bruisers, which there are a ton of. You're also going to extra turn to give your team effectiveness, which is not the biggest thing, but pestilence, which is huge. And this pestilence buff is insane because it makes all your other teammates apply venom as well, which is the same. You know, it does 10% max health per stack, which is crazy, and then injuries, which is pretty crazy, right? And you'll see that it also will see our push. So, you know, very overloaded kit. You have this S3 to sleep, put venom, have your team push up with your S2, apply more injuries and do a ton of damage, right? It makes any AoE attacker very strong, right? If you put pestilence on like a Bellion, Navy Captain Landy, Abyssal Euphine, we're all very meta right now. You'll see that this injury will stack up very quick. And then you'll see on top of that, you have his S1, which is a chance to sleep, which is very annoying already. But you'll see that when you attack with your S1, this will deal additional damage equivalent to the injuries that is on the target. So not only do you apply a ton of injuries, you make your team apply a ton of injuries, and you have Death Deal Array detonate them. If you pair him with another injury unit, like an Urban Shadow Shoe or like a Bellion on injury, or sometimes you can see Navy Captain Landy's on injury, Death Deal Array not only becomes a super tanky, super toxic debuffing unit with CR pushing potential, but he also does a ton of damage. And the biggest problem with Death Deal Array is if you ignore him, right, he will just apply a ton of these injuries and just, you know, whittle you down with his S1. But if you focus him, usually when you pair him with like Navy Captain Landys and Abyssal Euphines, they'll be stacking their fighting spirit and then they'll use their game-winning S3. So it puts you in a very rough spot. And even though there are counters such as Dragon King Sharoon and even things such as cleansers, the thing is, like, even without him using his like S3 or S2, even his S1's just strong enough, and usually Death Deal Array is a lot tankier than his counters, so what you can actually do is kill his counters first and then use your S3 and S2. And there's a lot of things you can do with him. He's very annoying, very toxic. I think the hardest counter for newer players could probably be like Celine, because it stops him from S3ing and S2ing, but Celine is very squishy as well, so usually you kill Celine off and then Death Deal Array goes crazy. So yeah, that is what I think for the ranking for the Moonlight Blessing. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys actually chose, and if you regret what you chose or if you're very happy with it. Me personally, I actually chose Death Deal Array a long time ago, before he was strong, because I kind of liked his kit, and then he got buffed and now he's super crazy, so pretty happy. But thanks for watching, guys. If you guys want to see more rankings like this, let me know in the comments down below, and also hit that like button and consider subscribing, and I will see you guys next time.